fog out there wasn't the kind that drifts through and clears. It sat on the boardwalk like a lid. The planks were slick under my boots, the rail wet and cold when I touched it. Redwoods rose up as dark columns and vanished into white. Beyond the boards, the marsh and the bay were gone. Sound didn't travel right. It felt pressed down like the coast was holding its breath. A foghorn carried in from somewhere out over the water, clean and heavy. I tried to treat it like weather. Mara walked a few feet ahead of me, hood up, shoulders tight, hands in her pockets. 15-year-old distance, not running away, just making space. I let her have it as long as I could still see her outline. Then, we passed the same redwood snag twice. A split chunk of trunk lay off the right side, blackened and jagged with one pale strip of wood showing through the break. The first time, I barely clocked it. The second time, my stomach tightened. I told myself it was another snag that looked the same, but the angle was wrong to ignore. It felt like a loop. I looked for the white stakes that marked the trail. They popped out of the fog in short segments beside the boards. The spacing was off, too close, then a gap that felt too wide. One leaned slightly like it had been pushed in and never straightened. A dumb detail that didn't feel dumb. I closed the distance between me and Mara without touching her. I didn't want to grab her arm and start a whole thing. I just wanted her close enough that if she slipped, or if I was wrong about the trail, I could correct fast. "Dad, I'm fine. Stop hovering," Mara snapped. "Stay where I can see you," I said. The boardwalk creaked under us. Fog beaded on my eyelashes. The foghorn sounded again, then a third time, evenly spaced. On the third blast, something in me shifted. 3 in a row, a pattern. Right after that, a whistle snapped behind us, short, sharp, close enough that it felt aimed at me. It had that clean edge people use when they want your attention. Every instinct I had wanted to turn around or call Mara's name to make sure she heard it. I didn't do either. I kept my eyes forward. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't give the fog anything back. My hand went to Mara's sleeve anyway, not a grip, just contact, like I was checking she was still there. I guided us back the way we'd come, quiet and fast. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I just turned us around and walked. The porch light should have been a comfort. Instead, it looked too far away, like the distance kept stretching. I told myself it was the visibility, the way fog eats depth. Still, my throat felt tight. Mara didn't say anything. That scared me more than the whistle did. Gravel finally crunched under my boots. The cabin emerged as a dark shape with a yellow porch bulb. I got the key in the lock on the first try. We stepped inside and I shut the door hard enough that the frame rattled. I slid the deadbolt, then stood there listening. Nothing. Just the heater clicking on, just the refrigerator hum. The curtains were still open. Fog pressed against the glass like wet paper. I moved fast, grabbed fabric, pulled it shut. "Curtains. Now," I told her. Mara yanked the other side closed with one sharp motion. The room felt smaller the second the last gap disappeared, like we'd sealed ourselves inside. The kitchen was a few steps away. On the counter sat a black binder, open to the first page. Not closed, not tucked away, open like someone had left it that way for us. The page was laminated. Bold title. A list underneath. I stood over it and felt my stomach drop as the foghorn and the whistle replayed in my head. 3 in a row. A whistle in the fog. The words on the page were plain, like safety instructions. No joke tone, no wink. Just a pattern written down by someone who expected it to happen again. I read enough to understand why my gut had screamed at me not to call out. After 6 p.m., no whistling, no calling out, no music outside. If you hear a whistle or someone calling from the fog, don't answer. Go inside and lock the door. Another line talked about the foghorn hitting 3 times and closing every curtain. It wasn't the kind of list you write for fun. It was the kind you write when you're tired of people not listening. Mara stood a few feet back, silent, and I didn't turn around to check her face. I didn't want to see fear on her, and I didn't want to see the look she'd give me if she thought I was making it worse. I wanted this weekend to be simple. A quiet place, a reset, a chance to breathe. Instead, I was in a cheap cabin with fog pressed to the windows and rules on the counter that matched the sounds outside. To make sense of it, I need to back up to Friday afternoon. Friday, 1:40 p.m. I was still in my truck behind a middle school in Sonoma County, staring at a work order and telling myself this weekend was going to be different. The work order was normal. A classroom thermostat that wouldn't hold steady, a custodial closet sink backing up again, 2 ceiling tiles stained brown from a leak nobody reports until the rain starts. School maintenance is like that. The problems aren't dramatic, they're just constant, and they don't care how your life is going. You show up, you fix what you can, you write down what you can't, and you move on. I'd finished the easy parts already. Swapped the thermostat, cleared the drain, replaced the tiles, and left myself a note to check the flashing next week. Earlier that morning, I'd been on my knees in a cafeteria hallway, prying gum off the bottom of a bench because someone thought it was funny. The week before that, it was a door handle ripped clean off a bathroom stall. None of it is glamorous. It's just the stuff that keeps a building from sliding into chaos. My hands were steady when I worked. The work made sense. It was everything outside the work that didn't. Sophia had been gone 8 months. She died in a highway accident on 101 when a pickup crossed the center line in the rain. That's the whole sentence. There isn't a longer version that makes it easier to swallow. 1 minute she was driving home, and the next my phone was ringing and a stranger was saying my name like he already felt sorry for me. After that, life turned into paperwork and quiet. Death certificates, insurance forms, a folder with tabs that never stayed organized, calls I didn't want to make, signatures I didn't want to sign. Mara and I moved through the house like it was someone else's, careful around Sophia's things. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet like it might get used. Her jacket stayed on its hook until I finally put it in a box and felt sick afterward. The worst part was how normal the house looked from the outside. Same driveway, same porch light, same trash pickup day. Like nothing had happened, and we were the only ones who knew the air inside had changed. Money got tight in a way I'd never let it get before. Sophia's income was gone. My overtime dried up because I couldn't stomach late shifts anymore, and because Mara needed me home, even when she acted like she didn't. The savings thinned. The little buffer I used to have for car repairs or a surprise bill just wasn't there. I started watching the grocery total like it was a math test. Gas prices mattered. $100 problem didn't feel small anymore. I wasn't trying to be heroic. I was trying to keep the lights on, keep food in the fridge, and show up to work without looking like I was about to fall apart. Mara was 15 and too old for the comforting lines adults love. She didn't cry much after the first month. She went distant, door shut, headphones on. Replies that sounded like they'd been sanded down to nothing. When she did talk, it came out sideways, sharp or flat, like she was keeping her balance on ice. If I mentioned counseling or processing, she'd look at me like I'd started speaking another language. If I asked how she was doing, she'd say fine, and the word meant stop. Some nights I'd hear her moving around at 2 or 3 in the morning, pacing quietly, like she couldn't get comfortable inside her own skin. In the morning, she'd pretend she slept. I wasn't doing great either, but I had to keep moving. I went back to work fast because staying home felt like sitting in a room full of ghosts I didn't believe in. Work gave me simple problems with simple solutions. A broken hinge, a clogged drain, a light that won't stop flickering. Things you can actually fix. The trip was my idea, and I knew how it could sound. A grieving dad trying to force a healing weekend on a teenage girl who doesn't want to be healed on command. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't need a breakthrough moment. I wanted air, different walls, 2 days where we weren't trapped in the same rooms where Sophia had lived and then disappeared from. 2 days where Mara didn't have to walk past the same hallway and remember, and I didn't have to stare at the same kitchen counter and feel like I was failing at everything that mattered. I started looking at cabin listings late at night after Mara went to bed. Not because I was excited, but because it gave me something to do besides sit on the couch and think. Everything that looked nice was expensive. Anything with a real view was out of reach. Even the worn places wanted money I didn't have. I kept scrolling until I found something cheap enough that it felt possible without a second mortgage. Fogline Cabin popped up with a price that made me click just to see why. Rainy season discount, frequent fog, boardwalk access, limited service area. The photos looked clean. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, a couch that didn't look like it had lived through 1,000 weekends. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't look like a trap either. The reviews were mostly normal complaints. The heater was loud. The Wi-Fi was spotty. The road got slick. People whining about weather like weather owed them something. The listing had a note about fog season and visibility, and another about staying on marked trails. It was written like liability, not like a story. I saw it and filed it under common sense. Coastal fog is real. Wet boardwalks are real. People getting turned around because they wander off is real. None of it felt like a reason not to go. The bigger reason was that staying home felt worse. Home was where the silence lived, and where every quiet weekend turned into me staring at a wall while Mara disappeared into her room. When I finally brought it up to Mara, I did it in the kitchen, casual, like I was asking about dinner. She was leaning against the counter with her phone, not looking at me. I kept it simple because if I gave her a speech, she'd shut down. "We don't have to fix anything. Just get out of the house," I said. She paused like she was deciding whether to fight me or ignore me. "Don't make it a whole thing," Mara said flatly. "I won't," I promised, trying to stay calm. That was the deal. No speeches, no pressure to have a good time, just a drive, a cheap cabin, and a weekend where I'd try to be present without stepping on every landmine in our living room. I packed groceries that wouldn't spoil, coffee, extra batteries, and a rain jacket I bought because mine was torn. I threw my small tool bag in the truck out of habit. I told myself it was just being prepared. The truth was, I don't like showing up anywhere empty-handed anymore. It makes me feel useless. Before I pulled out from behind the middle school, I sat there with the engine idling and the work order on the seat beside me. I folded the paper and shoved it into the glove box. I didn't know about the boardwalk yet. I didn't know about the foghorn. I didn't know there'd be a binder waiting on a counter like a warning sign. I just knew I couldn't keep doing nothing and calling it survival, and I couldn't keep losing her in my own house. By the time we got up near Crescent City, the light had that flat coastal look, like the sun was doing its best through a wet sheet. Rain had been on and off for the last hour, never a full downpour, just enough to keep the road dark and the trees dripping. The air changed the closer we got to the water. It smelled like salt and cold wood and something metallic that always makes me think of docks and old nails. Even inside the truck with the vents running, I could feel that damp working its way into everything. I pulled off the highway and into a small shop with a gravel lot and bright lights that made the rain look like needles. It wasn't a tourist place, no cute signs, no gift racks, no postcards, just a Practical little market with a couple of beat-up trucks parked out front and a trash can that overflowed with coffee cups. The kind of place that stays open because people up here still need milk and gas when the weather turns. When I killed the engine, the silence in the cab felt heavy for a second, like neither of us wanted to move. Mara finally unbuckled and got out without looking at me. That was how most of the drive had been. Not angry, exactly, just sealed up. I grabbed my wallet and went in after her. Warm air hit me first, a mix of fryer grease, wet jackets, and pine-scented cleaner. The lights were harsh and the floor mats by the door were soaked through. A couple of locals stood near the counter, talking low, not laughing, just filling space while they waited for change. A radio behind the register played something tinny that I couldn't place. Everything about the place said normal. That was what I wanted. A normal stop on a normal trip, a chance to buy things that made the weekend easier. I went straight to the back coolers and grabbed a gallon of milk, then a carton of eggs, then lunch meat I didn't trust but bought anyway because it was cheap and it would keep. I added a loaf of bread, a bag of chips, and a jar of peanut butter. Practical food that didn't require any thinking. I stood there for a moment in front of the coffee station, staring at the rows of creamers like I was deciding something important. Then, I grabbed a small bag of ground coffee and moved on. Mara hovered near the aisle with phone chargers and cheap headphones. Her phone was in her hand like it was glued there. She kept tapping the screen, swiping, checking for bars that weren't coming. That wasn't just boredom. That was how she disappeared when she needed to. If she could get into a video or scroll until her eyes went blank, she didn't have to be in the truck with me, or in the weekend, or in the grief that sat between us and didn't move. I found a rack of rain jackets near the back wall. Thin plastic ones in sealed bags, bright colors, the kind that tear if you look at them wrong. I picked 2 anyway. Then I grabbed a pack of AA batteries, a cheap lighter, and a small flashlight that looked like it would die the first time it hit concrete. Comfort supplies, not survival gear. I wasn't buying weapons. I wasn't thinking about danger. I was thinking about wet socks, dead remotes, and the kind of dark you get when the power flickers in the rain. At the counter, the clerk looked up from under a hood of dark hair. She was in her 20s maybe, wearing a plain sweatshirt and a name tag that said Juno. Her face had that tired, calm look you get when you've worked too many shifts and seen too many people. Not unfriendly, just alert. She rang up the milk and eggs and didn't comment. When she scanned the rain jackets, her eyes flicked to Mara, then back to me. I could feel her doing the quick math people do in small towns. Are you staying? Are you passing through? Are you going to be a problem? She asked where we were headed, and I answered without thinking too hard. It was easier than making up something. The name came out of my mouth like it was just another rental. Fogline Cabin? Juno asked. Her tone didn't change much, but something in her face tightened, like she'd just heard a familiar sound in the dark. I felt my shoulders go a little stiff. It wasn't fear yet. It was that mild, defensive thing you get when you realize you've stepped into something you don't understand. Yeah, just the weekend, I said. Juno kept scanning items, steady hands, no drama. She didn't lean in and whisper. She didn't tell me a story. She just looked up at me long enough to make sure I was paying attention. Read the binder, I'm serious, she warned. That was it. No explanation, no smile to soften it, like she was telling me to buckle a seatbelt. I nodded because nodding was easier than arguing. People like me argue when we're uncomfortable. We turn everything into liability and common sense and jokes. I didn't want to do that in front of Mara. I didn't want to teach her to dismiss warnings just because they came from someone who looked tired. Mara stepped closer to the counter and held her phone up like it was evidence. Her screen was blank except for the time and the little bars that kept dropping in and out. Is there Wi-Fi? Mara asked. Juno's eyes flicked to her, and for the first time her expression softened just a little. Not sympathy exactly, more like recognition, like she'd seen that look on teenagers before, the look that says, "I'm not asking for fun, I'm asking for a lifeline." "Sometimes. Don't call out in the fog," Juno said quietly. Mara frowned, like the second half of that sentence didn't belong in the first half. I felt the same way. Wi-Fi and fog rules didn't go together in my head. Juno didn't explain, and I didn't push her. Something about the way she said it made me feel like if I asked why, she'd either shut down or give me an answer I didn't want. She handed me the receipt and a plastic bag that already had a damp spot at the bottom from the milk. I stepped to the side to let the next customer up, but I didn't leave right away. The place had that small town lull where people talk because there's no reason not to. Juno started restocking a display of candy bars without looking up, like the conversation was over, but her earlier words kept turning over in my head. "Read the binder. Don't call out." As if that was a normal thing to tell a renter. A man in a work jacket said something to Juno about the weather, and she answered with a short nod. Another guy mentioned the fog rolling in hard last week, and how somebody had ended up walking in circles near the turnout off the highway. The words were casual, the way people talk about deer in the road or a dead battery. "Close to the road," he said, and they still couldn't find him until morning, like he was right there but not right there. Juno didn't correct him. She didn't add anything. She just listened with that same tired calm, like she'd heard versions of it before. Mara drifted toward the door, not in a hurry, just done. I followed her out into the cold, damp air and the rain that felt sharper after the warmth inside. The sky was lower now, darker at the edges, and the wind off the water had a bite to it. Mara pulled her hood up without me saying anything. I carried the bags and tried not to think about how Juno had said binder, like it was a piece of equipment, not a booklet. On the drive back to the highway, Mara stared at her phone again, tapping, swiping, trying to load something that wouldn't load. I watched the wet road and the trees and the fog gathering in the low spots, and I told myself it was just locals being locals. People warning you about weather, about getting turned around, about doing dumb things after dark. That was normal. That was practical. I could live with practical. Still, when the fog thickened ahead and the world started to lose its edges, I found myself thinking about her exact phrasing, the way she'd looked at me when she said it, like she was trying to hand me something without putting it in my palm. "Read the binder. Don't call out in the fog. And don't go checking what looks wrong, like proving it will make it safer." The road to the cabin narrowed and got worse the last few miles. Pavement turned to patched asphalt, then to gravel that the rain had darkened into something that looked like wet slate. The truck tires hummed and hissed, and I kept both hands on the wheel because the shoulder disappeared in places and the ditches looked deep. Redwoods pressed in close on both sides. Their trunks were so thick they felt unreal, like pillars holding up a ceiling you couldn't see. Every now and then, the headlights caught fog drifting low between them, rolling like smoke off the ground. Mara didn't talk. She stared out the window with her hood still up, chin tucked, the posture of someone riding out a situation they didn't ask for. I tried not to fill the silence with questions. I'd learned that pushing for conversation when she wasn't ready just made her retreat further. I kept driving and watched for the next turn. The GPS dot crawled along a road that looked like it had been drawn with a shaky hand. When it finally told me to turn, the driveway was easy to miss. A short wooden sign sat half hidden behind ferns, the letters faded and swollen from rain. I slowed, turned in, and felt the truck slip for half a second on packed mud before the tires caught again. The drive curved through trees and opened into a small clearing where the cabin sat low and dark against the trunks. It was a simple place, one story, weathered siding, a small porch with 2 steps and a single porch bulb throwing yellow light onto wet boards. The roofline was shallow, and rainwater slid off it in a steady sheet. The air smelled like wet cedar and cold earth. Somewhere beyond the trees, I could hear the bay, not waves exactly, more like a constant hush. The boardwalk was visible from the cabin. That surprised me. I expected it to be down a trail or around the side, something you had to go looking for. Instead, it started just off the right side of the clearing, a ribbon of pale wood leading into fog. White stakes marked its edge in a line that faded into nothing. It didn't look inviting. It looked like a path somebody built because the ground beside it would swallow your boots. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the wheel. I felt that familiar tug to check my phone, to see if there were messages, to anchor myself in something else. I didn't. I looked at Mara instead. She had already unbuckled. We got out into the damp cold. Rain hit my face like grit. Mara grabbed her backpack from the floor and stood close to the porch steps without moving toward them, like she was waiting to see what kind of place this really was. I went around to the back, grabbed the grocery bags and the cheap rain jackets, and started toward the door. It opened before I reached it. A woman stood on the porch like she'd been waiting. Early 60s maybe, with gray hair pulled back tight and a heavy work coat zipped to her chin. She wore boots that looked built for mud and a knit cap pulled low. Her face was blunt and set, the kind of expression that doesn't offer you anything unless you earn it. No smile, no friendly greeting to smooth the edges. "Checkout's 11, not noon," Ruth said. She said it like it was the first thing that mattered, and maybe it was. I nodded once. "Read the binder," she added. She angled her head toward the kitchen window like she could see through the wall. The way she said binder made it sound like a tool, something you used to keep from losing a finger. "Got it," I said. Ruth's eyes shifted to Mara. Not a warm look, not cruel either. Just a quick assessment, like she was checking if Mara had a jacket, if she looked sick, if she looked like trouble. Mara met her gaze and didn't offer anything back. Ruth turned slightly and pointed past me toward the side of the cabin where a small utility box sat under the eaves. "Breaker panels by the front closet. Don't run the heater and the microwave at the same time. Hot water's limited. You get one good shower, then it needs recovery." She spoke in short bursts, each one practical, each one delivered like she'd said it 1,000 times. "Weather changes fast. Fog moves in, visibility drops. Don't go wandering around trying to be clever." She paused, looking past the clearing toward the boardwalk. The white stakes disappeared into the fog like fence posts in snow. "If you need me, I'm 10 minutes back toward town. Don't call after 9 unless you're bleeding or your roof's on fire." She said it without humor. Then she stepped down off the porch and moved toward a dark SUV parked at the edge of the clearing like it belonged there. Mara watched her go. I watched her go too, and something about the way Ruth moved through the space made me feel like we were guests in a place that didn't want guests. Like we were on her schedule, her rules, her patience. When her taillights disappeared between the trees, the clearing felt quieter. Rain hissed in the leaves. I climbed the porch steps and opened the door. Inside smelled like heat that had been off for a while, then turned on. Dry air with a hint of propane, damp wood, and that faint stale smell cabins get when they sit empty between rentals. The living room was small, couch against one wall, a low table, a TV that looked older than it should. A kitchenette sat off to the side with a small stove, microwave, and a fridge humming like it was working too hard. Everything looked clean enough, not nice, but cared for. The boardwalk was still visible through the front window, a pale line cutting into fog. I set the bags on the counter and noticed the binder immediately. Black 3-ring, thick, with a laminated cover page. The title was printed in plain block letters. No decoration, no welcome message, just information. The kind of binder you see in a maintenance closet or a job trailer. I opened it and found the rules on the first page. They were written like safety guidelines, short sentences, clear triggers, no jokes, no apology for how strange they sounded. The first one hit me in the chest because it lined up with what Juno had said. After 6 p.m., no whistling, no calling out, no music outside. If you hear a whistle or someone calling from the fog, don't answer. Go inside and lock the door. The next one talked about the foghorn sounding 3 times in a row and closing every curtain, leaving one interior light off until morning and not checking outside again. Another rule said not to use a flashlight in the bathroom, not to look into the mirror while holding a phone light, and to use the overhead light only. Another said, if you heard footsteps on the roof, not to go outside, to run hot water in the kitchen sink for 30 seconds, then stop, and not to look up through windows while the water ran. I kept reading, and the boardwalk showed up in its own rule. Don't follow the boardwalk trail marked by white stakes past the second bend. If you cross the second bend by mistake, turn around immediately and keep one hand on the left rail until you reach gravel. That one was so specific, it made my mouth go dry. Not just don't go past here, not just stay on the trail. Keep one hand on the left rail until you reach gravel. Like the rule assumed you'd be disoriented. Like it assumed the boardwalk could take you somewhere you didn't mean to go. The last one felt like it belonged in an incident report. If any sign, marker, or label looks different than it did earlier, don't verify by walking closer. Stay inside for 15 minutes with low TV audio on, then write the time in the log page in the binder. There was a blank log page behind it, lines waiting for dates and times. I stood there holding the binder, listening to the rain tap the window and the fridge hum, and I felt the edges of the weekend shift. I wanted to tell myself it was liability. Tourists get dumb in fog, people wander, people panic. Owners write scary-sounding rules to keep idiots from suing. That explanation almost fit, except for how clean the wording was. It didn't sound like a lawyer wrote it. It sounded like someone who'd seen the same situation play out and got tired of cleaning up afterward. Mara came in behind me and dropped her backpack on the floor with a thud. She looked around like she was cataloging exits. She saw the boardwalk through the window, and her eyes held on it for a second, then moved on. Then she saw the binder open in my hands. "What's that?" she asked. I closed the binder halfway, not because I wanted to hide it forever, but because I didn't want to throw the whole list at her like a warning siren. She had enough weight on her already. I didn't need her lying awake all night imagining things in the fog. She stepped closer anyway, and her gaze flicked to the laminated page like she was reading without trying to. "She's intense," Mara muttered. "Just follow the rules," I told her. "These aren't normal rules," she insisted. She wasn't wrong. My first instinct was to give her a calm explanation, to frame it as safety and weather and locals being cautious. My second instinct was to do what I always do when something feels off at a job site. Post the instructions where I can't pretend I didn't see them. I pulled the laminated page out of the binder carefully and set it on the counter. I found a magnet on the fridge shaped like a whale and pinned the page under it, front and center. Not dramatic, not a speech. Just a simple decision made with the part of my brain that doesn't like surprises. I flipped to the log page behind the rules and saw empty lines waiting. I shut the binder and set it beside the coffee maker like it belonged there. Then, I started putting groceries away and told myself the same thing I'd told myself all day. This was a cheap cabin in rainy season. The rules were weird because the conditions were weird. We'd follow them. We'd keep it simple. We'd sleep, wake up, and in the daylight, the boardwalk would look like nothing more than wet wood and fog. The Wi-Fi never really showed up. It flirted with us. A little icon would appear on Mara's phone for 2 seconds, then drop the second she tried to load anything. The router sat on a shelf by the TV with lights blinking like it was negotiating with the air. I unplugged it once and plugged it back in, counted to 10, watched the lights cycle, and got the same result. Spotty isn't even the right word. It was nothing, with occasional hope. Mara kept pacing between the living room and the kitchen, phone in hand, thumb dragging down the screen like the motion itself could force a connection. "There's no signal. This is a joke," Mara muttered. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that we didn't need it, that we could play cards or watch a movie or just sit and let the rain do its thing. None of those answers would land. Wi-Fi wasn't entertainment for her. It was a way to disappear without leaving the room. It was how she got through hours she didn't want to feel. "Just give it a night," I said. The TV at least worked. Barely. A couple local channels came in, fuzzy around the edges, with voices that sounded like they were coming through a wall. I left it on low. Not to entertain her, just to fill the cabin with something that wasn't silence. I made dinner because dinner is an action with steps. Heat water, stir, serve, put the pot back. I kept my movements steady and normal, like the weekend was still what I'd promised her it would be. Outside, rain ticked against the roof in light bursts. Every now and then, wind pushed the redwoods and the sound rolled across the cabin like a deep sigh. The fog pressed against the windows. You could see it in the way the glass turned gray, like there was wet paper taped on the other side. I kept catching myself looking at the rules page on the fridge. That made me angry. Not at the page, at myself. I didn't want to be the guy who turns a cheap cabin into a problem because he read something weird in a binder. I wanted to be a normal dad on a normal trip, not someone spiraling because a list told him how to behave. Then the foghorn sounded, one long, heavy note out over the bay. A pause. Another pause. Then the third, evenly spaced like someone counting. 3 in a row, exactly the way the rule said, and my body reacted before my mind had time to argue about it. I felt my attention narrow. The cabin seemed smaller. The air felt tighter. I stood up and went to the curtains without making it a discussion. I pulled the living room curtain shut, then the kitchen window curtain, then the small bedroom window curtains down the hall. It wasn't panic. It was procedure. The rule was specific. Specific rules exist because something happened often enough to get written down. The next part of that rule was the one that felt stupid. Leave one interior light off until morning. I walked down the hall and turned off the lamp that sat near the bedroom doors. I left everything else as it was. The kitchen light stayed on. The TV stayed on low. The hallway went dark, a long strip of shadow I could feel at the edge of my vision. Mara watched me from the couch, expression flat. She didn't ask. She didn't laugh. She just looked away and kept trying her phone like she was refusing to let my behavior set the mood. A few minutes later, she went to the bathroom. The door clicked shut. I heard the faint shift of her moving around, then a thin blade of bright light slid under the door. Phone light, reflex. She wasn't trying to break anything. She was trying to see. I got up and walked to the hallway. I stopped outside the bathroom door, took one breath to keep my voice from sounding like an order, and then I said it anyway because I didn't trust anything else. "Don't use your phone light in there," I told her. The light cut out, then came back on for half a second, like she'd tilted it away instead of turning it off. "Why?" she snapped. "Because I said so." My voice came out harder than I meant. There was a pause, thick enough that I could feel her deciding whether to fight me. Then the light disappeared completely. I reached around the door frame and hit the overhead switch from the outside. The bathroom filled with harsh yellow light, cheap fixture, buzzing faintly. She opened the door just a crack and gave me a look that said I was being ridiculous. I didn't answer it. I didn't apologize. If I apologized, it would turn into a conversation I wasn't ready to have. For a second, I saw her in the mirror behind the door, just a slice of reflection. It wasn't a ghost or a face in the glass. It was something smaller and worse because it was easy to doubt. The reflection lagged, a fraction of a beat, like the mirror was showing her movement a hair late, like the image was catching up. Then it snapped back to normal. I blinked once and it was just a mirror again, just a kid washing her hands under bad light. She shut the door and I walked back to the living room with my shoulders tight. I sat on the couch and pretended to watch the TV. My eyes kept drifting to the ceiling. I hated that too. The footsteps started not long after. At first I told myself it was rain shifting on the roof. Then I realized it had a rhythm, not scraping, not dragging. A steady pattern crossing above us like weight moving from point to point. It wasn't loud. It was clear. It traveled from the back corner toward the center of the cabin, paused, then continued. Deliberate, measured, too regular to be branches. Mara appeared in the hallway, her phone in her hand, but dark now. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The cabin felt like it was listening with us. The rule for this sat in my head like a flashing sign. Don't go outside. Run hot water in the kitchen sink for 30 seconds, then stop. Don't look up through windows while the water runs. I stood, walked to the sink, and turned the hot handle. The pipes clunked once, and then water rushed out, steaming faintly in the cooler air. I kept my eyes on the stream. I didn't look at the window above the counter. I didn't glance toward the front door. I stared at the water like it was the only thing that mattered. Overhead, the footsteps crossed again, slower this time, then stopped directly above the living room. I could feel the pause in my bones, like whoever was up there was waiting to see what we'd do next. I counted in my head, steady and plain. 1, 2, 3. The TV murmured behind me on low volume. Mara stayed silent. At 30, I shut the water off. The sudden quiet felt huge. The heater clicked. The fridge hummed. Then there was one more step above us, lighter than the rest, like a test. I didn't move. I didn't look up. After a moment, nothing. No retreating footsteps, no door, no explanation. Just absence, like the sound had never been there. Mara went back to the couch. I sat down too. The hallway lamp stayed off, turning the corridor into a dark throat leading to the bedrooms. I didn't like that I'd done it on purpose, but I kept it that way anyway. Later, after Mara finally went to her room and shut the door, I stood alone in the kitchen with the rules page pinned to the fridge. The cabin felt warm, but the warmth didn't help. I opened the binder, flipped to the log page, and wrote 2 short entries. The time the foghorn hit 3 times, the time I heard footsteps on the roof. No drama, no extra notes, just ink and numbers. I closed the binder and set it back beside the coffee maker. I turned off the kitchen light, left the TV on low, and sat on the couch, staring at a screen I wasn't really watching. Outside, the fog pressed against the covered windows. Inside, one hallway lamp stayed dark because a laminated page told me it should, and I didn't like how quickly I'd started treating that page like it knew what it was talking about. Morning tried to smooth everything over. Gray light seeped around the curtains and made the cabin look like any other rental. The heater clicked. The fridge hummed. Rain had thinned to a mist. If I'd wanted to lie to myself, I could have called it normal. I made coffee and drank it standing at the counter. Mara sat at the table in her hoodie, scrolling on a phone that still didn't have much to load. Every time I tried small talk, it landed flat. Weather, the drive, what we'd do after breakfast. She gave me nods that didn't mean yes or no. The quiet felt like listening. The coffee tasted burnt, but it gave my hands something to do. I kept glancing at the log page in the binder like it was a work ticket I couldn't close out. Mara didn't look at it once. She avoided the fridge, avoided the counter, avoided anything that would turn last night into a conversation. She drifted into the living room and stopped at the shelf by the TV. Her eyes locked on a chipped white mug with a faded lighthouse printed on it. I hadn't noticed it the night before. Sophia had a mug like that, same lighthouse, same chip, same little crack down the side. She used it for tea when she couldn't sleep. After the accident, I packed it away in a box in our garage back in Sonoma County. Seeing one like it in this cabin shouldn't have meant anything. Plenty of souvenir mugs looked the same. But Mara froze, swallowed hard, and stepped back like she didn't want to touch the thought. It wasn't just that Sophia owned one. Sophia was the kind of person who picked a favorite thing and used it until it was worn out. She'd keep the chipped mug because it was hers, because it still worked, because it made the kitchen feel like home. Mara had rolled her eyes at it 100 times. Now she looked at it like it was a message, and I hated how fast her face changed. She turned toward the front window, toward the boardwalk starting right off the clearing. In daylight, you could see the first stretch of wet planks and the line of white stakes beside it. Beyond the first turn, the fog still erased everything. "I just want to walk. That's it," Mara insisted. I didn't like that boardwalk. I didn't like how it sat there like the only thing to do. I didn't like that the binder treated it like a hazard, but I also didn't want to shut her down and turn the weekend into me policing every move. "Second bend, then we turn back," I said. We pulled on jackets and stepped out. The air was cold and damp, the clearing muddy. The boardwalk was slick under our boots, the rail wet under my palm. Redwoods stood close on both sides, thick trunks disappearing up into gray. Mara stayed a step ahead, not far, just enough. The first bend came quickly. The stakes were evenly spaced there, normal, like they belonged. The second bend was farther in, a sharper turn to the left where the stakes tightened closer together. I could see the exact point the rule meant. I could see where we were supposed to stop. Mara slowed at the bend and looked past it, like she was deciding whether to push. I stepped beside her and shook my head once, keeping it simple. "You're acting paranoid," she muttered. I didn't answer. I pointed back the way we came. That should have been enough. She took one small step past the bend anyway. I followed half a step behind because I didn't want to leave her alone past that line. I didn't want to grab her. My boot landed on wet plank. The sound dropped out, not muffled, gone. The rain in the trees vanished. The distant hush of the bay disappeared. Even the small creaks of the boardwalk seemed to dull. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. Mara went rigid beside me. I looked back toward the clearing. The cabin wasn't there. The boardwalk behind us didn't feel like a path anymore. It felt like a corridor. The white stakes on either side looked less like markers and more like rails. Mara's hand hovered near the rail. She didn't speak, but I could see panic rising in the way her shoulders lifted. "Hold the rail, don't talk," I told her. I turned around immediately and put my left hand on the rail. Cold, wet wood under my fingers. Mara mirrored me. We walked back step by step, no talking, no calling out, no trying to prove anything. The silence stayed with us too long. My mind tried to count steps, but the numbers slipped. All I could do was keep my hand on the rail until the boards ended. Gravel crunched under my boots and sound came back in one ugly rush. Rain, wind, a gull far off. I didn't stop until we were both fully off the boardwalk. Mara kept her hand on the rail for an extra second, like she needed to feel it end. "This isn't funny," Mara said quietly. I nodded once and turned us back to the cabin. My heart didn't start racing until we were back on gravel. Out there on the boards, everything had felt too controlled, like the panic didn't have room to run. Once the sound returned, my hands started shaking around nothing, and I had to flex my fingers to hide it. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as when we left. That made my stomach turn. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't darkness. It was the place itself. Inside, the rules page was still pinned to the fridge under the whale magnet. The binder sat on the counter. Mara dropped her jacket on a chair and stood like she didn't trust the room. I wanted to pull a curtain aside and stare at the boardwalk to verify the cabin would still be there, to make sense of it. That urge felt like a trap. Rule 6 had been written for that exact impulse. On the counter, the wooden key tag sat where I'd left it. Fogline Cabin burned into the wood. Only the lettering looked slightly off now, like the spacing had shifted. Not enough to prove. Enough to itch. Rule 6 said don't verify. Stay inside 15 minutes with low TV audio on, then write the time in the log. I turned the TV on low, just enough to hear voices without catching words. I sat on the couch and watched nothing. Mara sat at the far end with her knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them, staring at the dark hallway where the lamp had been off the night before. Neither of us spoke. We just let the 15 minutes pass. When the timer hit 15, I opened the binder to the log page and wrote the time. One line. Marker looked different, stayed inside. My hand shook a little as I set the pen down. Daylight should have made it easier to dismiss what happened. Instead, it made it worse. The boardwalk didn't need night. It just needed one step past a bend and a person who thought rules were only there to cover somebody's liability, and it knew exactly how to use that. Before we went back inside, I flipped through the binder again and found a page labeled Local Contacts, Sheriff's Office, Non-Emergency, Dispatch. I took a quick photo of the numbers on my phone, just in case, and then I shut it before Mara could see me doing it. I didn't wait for another sign or another sound. After the boardwalk did what it did in daylight and the cabin snapped back into place like it had never gone anywhere, I stopped trying to convince myself we could outlast it. Leaving wasn't drama. It was the only adult decision left. I went to my room and stuffed clothes into my duffel. No folding, no planning, just shoving fabric into a bag until it zipped. Mara did the same in her room without me asking. That was the clearest answer she'd given me all weekend. She wanted out, and she didn't care how it looked. "We're leaving, now," I said. "Good," Mara said flatly. We moved fast. I dumped anything perishable into the trash, jammed the rest into a grocery sack, and grabbed my keys from the counter. The rules page stayed pinned to the fridge under the whale magnet. I didn't pull it down. I didn't want it in my hands right then. I wanted distance. Outside, the clearing looked harmless. Damp gravel, redwood trunks, fog hanging low like smoke that never finished drifting away. The boardwalk sat to the right with its white stakes fading into gray. It looked like an option. That's what made it dangerous. Mara got in first and shut the passenger door hard. I tossed the bags into the back seat, climbed in, and turned the key. Click, no crank, no struggle, just a single click and the dash lights dimming like the truck was tired. I tried again. Same click. My throat tightened with that specific anger that comes from knowing something didn't happen by accident. I popped the hood and stepped out into wet air. The engine bay looked normal at first. Then I saw the battery cable. The negative terminal was disconnected and laid neatly across the plastic housing like someone set it there on purpose. I leaned closer and saw wet fingerprints on the rubber casing, smeared along the length like they'd been dragged, fresh enough that they still shined. I reseated the cable and tightened it with my fingers as hard as I could, metal cold and slick. I slammed the hood, got back in, and turned the key again. The engine started rough for half a second, then smoothed out like nothing had been wrong. I pulled forward down the driveway, slow and controlled. The gravel was wet and the edges were muddy. The trees pressed in close and the fog thickened where the road dipped. Then I saw the SUV. Ruth's dark vehicle sat angled across the driveway near the road, blocking the exit. She stood beside it with her hands in her coat pockets, shoulders squared, face blank, like she was waiting for the moment she already knew would come. I stopped the truck at a safe distance and left it running. Mara didn't move. Her gaze stayed forward, but I could see the tension in her jaw. I got out and walked toward Ruth. The air felt colder near the trees. Rain misted my face. Ruth didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She held her ground like she owned it. "Boardwalk will get you to the turnout," Ruth insisted. She nodded toward the right, toward the boardwalk and the stakes disappearing into fog. She framed it like a shortcut, like it was practical, like she hadn't written a binder full of rules warning us to stay off it past the second bend. "No, we're not doing that," I snapped. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She just watched me the way a supervisor watches a guy on a job site decide whether he's going to do something stupid. Her eyes flicked past me to the truck, to Mara's silhouette in the passenger seat, then back to me. She pressed where she could without saying anything I could report cleanly. A pause. A look. A tiny head tilt that suggested I was overreacting, that I was the problem, that I wasn't competent enough to handle a little fog and a little inconvenience. I walked back to the truck without giving her anything else. I locked the doors. I reversed carefully and backed into the clearing, not taking my eyes off her in the mirror. She didn't move to stop me. She didn't need to. She had already proven she could strand us whenever she wanted. Back in the clearing, my phone flickered to 1 bar. I didn't trust it, but I tried anyway. I called the first number I'd photographed from the binder when the signal flickered back to life. The line crackled, held for a second, then stabilized enough that I could hear a voice. "Did you hear the foghorn in 3s?" Ward asked. The question hit me like a punch, not because it was scary, because it was exact, because it meant this wasn't just a weird property manager and a weird binder. It meant someone in uniform had heard this before. "How do you know that?" I said, and I meant it. The connection crackled and dipped. Ward's voice came and went, but the tone stayed the same. Controlled, clipped, urgent in a way he was trying to hide. He asked a string of questions I could barely catch, too specific to be guesswork. He told me what to do in short, hard instructions, like he was reading from a mental checklist. "Keep Mara inside. Don't go on the boardwalk. Don't call out into the fog. If anything looks off, don't verify. Stay put." The call dropped before I could get a straight answer about how fast he could get here, or if he was coming at all. My phone went to 0 bars. I stared at it for a beat, then set it down like it couldn't help me anymore. Mara was watching my face now. Her eyes were wide, but she wasn't panicking like a little kid. She looked angry and tired and scared all at once, like she'd been forced into an adult problem without being given adult tools. We went back inside. I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and pulled the curtains tight even though it was still daylight. Fog had thickened outside again, turning the windows into gray smears. The boardwalk start was barely visible through a thin gap in fabric, white stakes fading into nothing. The heater clicked on. The fridge hummed. The TV sat silent. The cabin felt too still, like it was waiting for us to make the next move. Then the whistle came. Not loud, not far. Close, like it was on the porch or just beyond the glass. 2 short notes and a longer one, the exact pattern Sophia used when she couldn't find her keys or when she wanted me to answer from the other room without yelling. It was such a small habit, so ordinary, that hearing it in the fog made my stomach drop harder than the footsteps had. Mara's head lifted, her mouth opened slightly, breath pulling in like she was about to answer before she could stop herself. I moved fast and stepped in front of her, putting my hand over her mouth for half a second, not hard, just firm enough to break the reflex. Her eyes snapped to mine, furious for a flash, then something softer moved under it. She knew. She didn't want to know, but she knew. I pulled my hand away and guided her back from the window with my palm on her shoulder. No speech, no explaining, just a clear physical no. The whistle came again, softer, like it was backing up toward the boardwalk, like it wanted us to follow. Mara's gaze slid toward the curtain gap without her meaning to. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to pull it back and look. That was when I noticed the key tag on the hook by the door. It was still the same wooden rectangle burned with Fogline Cabin, but the lettering looked wrong now. Not a different word, not a new message, just slightly off. Spacing shifted, one letter darker than the others, like someone had traced over it. Subtle enough that my brain wanted to lean in for proof. Mara saw it too. She took a step toward it, hand out, like she needed to pick it up and bring it closer to the light, like she needed to confirm she wasn't losing her mind. Rule 6 snapped into place in my head, as clear as if it were printed on the air. Don't verify. Stay inside 15 minutes with low TV audio on. Log the time. I got between her and the hook. I turned on the TV low, just enough for voices to fill the room without becoming a show. I sat down like this was boring and normal on purpose. Mara paced once, then stopped, then sat at the far end of the couch with her knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see it in her cheeks. The 15 minutes felt longer than it should. The TV murmured. The heater clicked. Outside, the fog pressed in. Every now and then the whistle tried again, quieter, like it was testing whether we'd break. When the 15 minutes were up, I opened the binder and wrote the time on the log page with a shaking hand. Second marker shift. Stayed inside. Low TV audio. I kept it short and clean, like a work note, because if I let myself write what it felt like, I'd never stop. Mara didn't look at the binder. She stared at the dark hallway where the lamp had been left off the night before. Her breathing was steady, but her posture was locked, like she was holding herself together with pure muscle. Outside, the fog swallowed the clearing, and somewhere in that gray, something had Sophia's whistle down perfectly, like it had practiced until it could make a 15-year-old girl almost answer without thinking. I didn't sleep after the whistle. I sat on the edge of the couch with the TV on low and watched the dark hallway like I was waiting for a problem to show itself in a form I could fix. Every time the heater clicked, my shoulders tightened. Every time the fridge compressor kicked, I had to remind myself that normal noises were allowed to exist. Mara dozed, sitting up with her hood still on, arms wrapped around her knees like she was trying to make herself smaller. I didn't move her. I didn't touch her. I didn't want her waking up and feeling like I'd taken control of her body on top of everything else. Sometime before dawn, the fog thinned a little, enough that the gray at the windows turned from solid to smeared. That was all the light we got. No sunrise, just a slow shift from black to dull. I made coffee again. I didn't even care if it tasted like burnt pennies. I needed the ritual. I needed something I could do with my hands that didn't involve thinking about the boardwalk or the white stakes or the way the key tag had looked wrong. I kept glancing at the binder on the counter and the rules page pinned to the fridge. and the longer I looked at it, the more I understood what had been happening. The binder wasn't protecting us, not really. It was shaping us. It was turning our choices into predictable moves. Close the curtains, leave a light off, don't look up, don't verify. Stay inside 15 minutes, log the time. Every rule had a response built into it, and every response kept us on the same rails. It kept us reacting instead of deciding. And when you're reacting, someone else gets to steer. I didn't know what was steering. I didn't need to name it. I just needed a way out that didn't depend on signs, stakes, or anything that could shift by a fraction and make my brain want to step closer. Maintenance work teaches you that when a system is unreliable, you bypass the system. You build a temporary route you can trust until you can shut the whole thing down. You use what you have. You make it simple and visible and hard to misunderstand. I went to the truck and grabbed the small tool bag I'd thrown in out of habit. Inside was electrical tape, a roll of bright orange surveyor's tape from an old job, and a cheap headlamp I used in crawl spaces. I also had a length of nylon cord I kept for tying down ladders. None of it was special. It was just stuff I hadn't bothered to remove from my life. Back inside, I turned on one steady light in the living room and left it on. Not the hallway lamp the binder had told us to keep off. Not a flickering bulb. One stable lamp that filled the room without creating corners that felt too deep. I pulled the curtains tight again, not because the binder said to, but because I didn't want Mara watching the fog and getting pulled toward it with her eyes. Then I built my own route. I tied one end of the nylon cord to the heavy porch post outside, low, near the base where it wouldn't slip. I ran the cord in a straight line toward the truck and tied it to the tow hook under the front bumper. Not tight enough to snap, just tight enough to guide. I added strips of orange tape every few feet along the cord, like little flags, bright enough to see even in gray light. It wasn't elegant. It didn't have to be. It was a line that couldn't be relabeled because it was ours. From the truck, I extended the line again toward the driveway, tying it to a low branch at the edge of the clearing, then to another point closer to where the gravel met the main road. I wasn't trying to build a highway. I was building a path that told my brain one thing: follow this and only this. Don't get tempted by stakes. Don't interpret. Don't check. Don't verify. Just move. Mara watched from the doorway while I worked, face pale, eyes sharp, like she was trying to figure out whether this was me improvising or me losing it. "So the binder was a trap?" Mara asked. "Parts of it, yeah," I said. She stared at the orange tape fluttering slightly in the misty air, then at the boardwalk line to the right, then back at me. "Then what do we do?" she insisted. "We do our own route. We don't follow theirs," I told her. That was the first time all weekend she looked at me like she believed I might actually have a plan. We packed fast. What mattered went in the truck. Everything else I left. I didn't care about being charged for leaving a mess. I didn't care about the deposit. I cared about getting Mara off this property and onto a road with other cars and normal signs and people who didn't know our names. When we stepped out onto the porch, the fog tried to pull our attention right away. The boardwalk sat there, wet and pale, white stakes fading into gray like teeth. Near the start of it, hanging from one of the stakes, was a small strip of cloth, blue, thin, tied like a ribbon. Sophia used to tie blue ribbons on Mara's backpack zippers when Mara was younger, little markers so she could find them fast. Mara's whole body went still. Her eyes locked on that cloth like it was a hand reaching out. I didn't tell her it wasn't real. I didn't tell her she was being manipulated. I didn't turn it into a lecture. I told her the truth. Her mom wasn't out there, and if she stepped onto that boardwalk, I might not get her back. Mara looked at me. Her jaw tightened. For a second, I thought she'd step toward the boardwalk anyway, just to prove she could. Then she exhaled hard, like it hurt, and turned away from it. She grabbed the orange-taped cord with one hand and followed me toward the truck. We moved along the line, one point to the next, eyes down, hands on what we'd built. I got her into the passenger seat, buckled her, then started the truck and followed the cord back toward the driveway. The exit was clear this time. Ruth's SUV was gone. The road looked exactly like it had the day before. That didn't comfort me. It just told me she could come and go whenever she wanted. I kept driving until the trees thinned and the gravel turned back into patched asphalt. My phone climbed from 0 bars to 1, then to 2. I didn't waste time. I called the number that had come through the day before. We met Deputy Kellen Ward at a turnout just outside town, a wide shoulder with a view of gray water through the trees. He arrived in a county SUV and stepped out like he'd already decided what this was and what it wasn't. He checked Mara first with his eyes, not asking her to talk, just making sure she was alive and upright. Then he looked at me. He didn't ask for a story. He asked for times. When we arrived, when the foghorn hit, when Ruth blocked the driveway, when the vehicle was tampered with, he wrote it down like it was an incident report because that's what it was to him. When I mentioned Ruth by name, his mouth tightened. When I mentioned the boardwalk and the stakes, he didn't look surprised. That was the part that made me feel sick. He made a call with his back turned, voice low. When he finished, he told us to go home and not stop anywhere remote. He didn't promise answers. He promised procedure. Stay out of that area in fog season, Ward said, like he was reading policy. Later we heard Ruth had been arrested for tampering and endangerment. The county didn't call it guiding. They didn't call it a trap. They called it interference and negligence and unlawful restraint. Clean words for a dirty thing. Ward never said what else they knew. He never said why he asked about foghorns and threes like it was a routine question. He just acted like the bigger part didn't belong in a report. Back in Sonoma County, the House felt the same. And also not. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel empty in the same way. Mara went to her room and shut the door, but she left it cracked for the first time in months. Small thing. Huge thing. For weeks after, she avoided fog like it had teeth. If the mornings got too gray, she stayed inside longer. If a road dipped into a low pocket of mist, she sat forward in her seat and watched the edges like she was expecting the world to change spacing. She stopped wearing headphones outside. She kept one ear open. I kept the rules page. I pulled it off the fridge before we left, folded it once, then again, and tucked it into my tool bag like it belonged with electrical tape and cord. Not as a trophy, not as proof I plan to show anyone, as a reminder that some instructions aren't written to cover liability. They're written because somebody wants you to survive long enough to leave.